Hi, this is Daniel with TrustGraph, and today I'm going to show you how to use the TrustGraph configuration generator. So this UI is linked in the GitHub repo, it's linked in our Getting Started guide, and it will allow you to generate all the deployment configuration you need through this UI. So one of the things that we want to check to begin with is the release version. You can see the config UI is currently using 0.13.2, which means it will build for those particular images. That's also important to know because this means you'll need to have the TrustGraph CLI for this particular version. Right now, we're making pretty big changes with every release of TrustGraph, so these versions do need to match up. There could be some compatibility issues otherwise. One of the biggest sources of compatibility issue would be if there are changes to the pulsar schemas. If there's any changes to those typically have an impact on the CLI. So this is where the landing page on the configuration generator, you'll see the first choices we have, or whether you want to use Docker, Podman, which of course Podman is an open source version of Docker that is totally drop-in replacement. Although we have seen that the memory allocations for some of the containers may need to change on Podman. Minikube for local Kubernetes deploy, and currently we can deploy TrustGraph to Google Cloud using the Google Kubernetes engine. More than likely, you're going to choose to, if you're going to run locally, Docker is probably the easiest way to go, or Podman. Here, we can choose any of these model deployments. So this would be the serverless endpoints in Azure, OpenAI in Azure, AWS Bedrock, directly through the Anthropic API to Claude, Cohere, Google AI Studio, using a local Llama file, using OLLAMA, the direct OpenAI API, or Vertex AI, of course, which is the Google Cloud platform for using Gemini and other LLMs. This is where you choose either between Cassandra or Neo4j, uh, vector database selections. You can choose the type of chunking algorithm you want to use. This is actually choosing chunk size. Now, this depends on if you choose recursive, this would, of course, be in characters. If you choose token, this would be in tokens. And this is how much overlap you want. Then, of course, you can select the temperature between 0 or 1. We've actually found that even though in theory 0 would be the most deterministic, it seems like for knowledge extraction, maybe zero point 0.1, zero point 0.2, zero point 0.3 is a better choice, but you may want to experiment with this yourself. And this is where you can specify the maximum tokens that you want it to be able to output. Now, let's just take a llama here. You don't actually have to input the model. We already have a drop-down list, so you can select whichever model you want to use, and that's true of all of these selections. So even when we go here to AWS Bedrock, we can see these are all the model names in Bedrock. Same with Google AI Studio. These are all the current ones available there. So for whatever model deployment you select, you'll get a drop-down list of models that you can potentially use. Now, customization. This is primarily for modifying the prompts that are used in our processes. And the three key ones right now are really these: the entity, relationships, and topics. These are the three processes that are used during the extraction process. So if I click this, we can now come here and we get instructions on how we could potentially modify this prompt. So this is the current prompt text. And as you can see, this variable text, this is actually where the chunk text gets inserted into the prompt. And this is the JSON schema for the object that the LLM wants to respond with. So for each one of these, so if we add relationships and we add the topics, you'll see that there is an expected JSON schema. This is necessary to actually build the RDF triple so that when the LLM responds, it's in this JSON schema. We then know how to parse that into the RDF triples, which get loaded into the knowledge graph and which get created into the map vector embedding. So for these particular modules, any of the instructions that you change, it still has to output this schema. Now, of course, you can change that schema, but that will require making some code changes actually within TrustGraph, and specifically with the Pulsar JSON schema and how the RDF modules build that. And the same thing with topics, we can see it's similar to the entities, except it's a topic as opposed to entity. And the reason why behind this is because most LLMs, if you say an entity, it tends to think more, well, I don't want to use the word think, but it tends to return people, places, things, objects, organizations, tangible entities. If you want it to be more conceptual, we found that using the word topic and kind of specifying that it's conceptual tends to return a separate list. However, there are quite a few LLMs where the entities and topics will return the same list. So once we come here to finish deployment, this will give you instructions on all the environment variables you need to set. So here, because I had selected Google AI Studio, it's telling us we need to set our API key to Google AI Studio _key. If we select another deployment, say Olama, we're going to see different instructions on how to set the host destination for the local Olama API. You can also use Olama across a local network. Say you have TrustGraph running on your laptop, but you have another machine with more GPU power that you have a model running on. We have documentation on the full TrustGraph site on how to configure that too. The AWS Bedrock is a little different too. We have to set a couple more. You have to set your AWS ADI key, ID key, excuse me, and your secret key. So every one of these different model deployments is going to give you instructions on everything you need to set. And as you see, actually within Azure's OpenAI service requires quite a few parameters, not just the endpoint and the token, but also you have to specify the API version and the model name. You actually can specify your own model name for those deployments. So you have to be really careful to remember whatever you've specified the model as, and you need to enter that in this variable. And then you would just click generate, and that will create your deployment file. So here, because I had selected Azure OpenAI, um, that one is a little bit of a unique one because again, that one doesn't have a model name. You have to specify it yourself. And we selected Cassandra and Qdrant. And when I click download, you can see we get a zip file with all the files that we need within inside of it. And now we get these instructions on you unzip that, navigate to that directory, and there'll be a Docker Compose YAML file. Once you launch the Docker engine, you launch Docker Compose up, and TrustGraph will be fully up and running.